welcome to our webinar on educators navigating the AI landscape with classroom use cases. We have an amazing panel of people who know what is going on the ground, who have been teaching educators, working with educators, who have been educators, and they're truly spectacular. We're really excited to start this conversation. I will ask, anybody who's comfortable with it, please introduce yourself in the chat. We really appreciate knowing who you are. I think people appreciate knowing who each other are. Tell us who you are, where you're logging in from, and maybe your role in EdTech. This is a great opportunity to connect with others in the community, which is really our goal at EdTech Insiders. This webinar is a sort of co-sponsored webinar. We're working together with the amazing EdTech Week group. EdTech Week is right around the corner now. We are really, really close to it. And so we are trying to make sure that everybody knows about what's happening at EdTech Week. You can attend. If you're in New York, please come by. It's happening at Teachers. It's actually happening on Columbia University campus, right next to Teachers College. One moment here. Yep. And we have two amazing Teachers College professors on the webinar today, two of whom I had the privilege of studying with in my time at Teachers College. I am a Teachers College graduate as well. So please introduce yourself in the chat, and we're going to get into some biographies of our totally amazing guests so we can start the conversation and have time for a deep conversation about educators in the age of AI and how they're navigating the AI landscape. So first off, we have Lalitha Vasudevan. She studies communication, literacy, and media practices of youth across educational settings, focusing on how digital technologies shape young people's learning trajectories and well-being. She specializes in multimodal storytelling, very important in this age of AI, and digital media pedagogy, and supports interdisciplinary scholarship that bridges technology innovation with social impact in education. She's currently the Vice Dean for Digital Innovation and Managing Director of the Teachers College Digital Futures Institute. She has many other titles. Her work has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the Spencer Foundation, and others. She's a recipient of a Divergent Publication Award for Excellence in Literacy in a Digital Age Research for the Pop and Play podcast. She's done a lot of other things as well, but we'll stop there. She's also published some books. You definitely look her up. She's amazing work. Dr. Ellen Meier is a professor of computing and educational practice at Teachers College Columbia and the executive director of the Center for Technology and School Change, which she co-founded. She also oversees the Educational Technology Specialist Certification Program for the college. Her research focuses on the use of technology to support inquiry-based, culturally relevant teaching and learning. She began her career as a teacher in a federal experimental school program with an interest in school reform and equity, and has pursued school change more broadly in a succession of regional and national responsibilities. Her policy works includes serving as co-chair of New York's Technology Policy and Practice Council for the state's Board of Regents. She has lots of degrees, as you might imagine, from Teachers College, from the University of Minnesota, and from the University of Iowa. And last but not least, we have Amanda Bickerstaff. She's the founder and CEO of AI for Education. She spends time all over the country working with teachers and educators and policymakers about AI. She's a former high school biology teacher and a former EdTech executive with over 20 years of experience in the education sector. She's a frequent consultant, speaker, and writer on the topic of AI in education. She leads workshops and professional learning across both K-12 and higher ed, and she's committed to helping schools and teachers maximize their potential through the ethical and equitable adoption of AI. So as we get started, I remind everybody, please tell us who you are in the chat. Keep the chat lively. I'm sure there's lots to talk about during this webinar. But let's start with you, Lalitha. So you have worked extensively on the topic of collaborative filmmaking and media production for youth. And we are entering this amazing era where kids can create professional quality film, audio, media without cameras, without actors, without film school training. How do you see this moment, this democratization of creative tools, changing arts education? And what opportunities excite you for this in the classroom? And do you think classrooms are going to embrace this opportunity?
Such a good question, Alex. And I just want to say it's lovely to be here back in conversation with you and this wonderful group of panelists. I think you're asking such an important question to really think about the role of EdTech in the lives of young people. And one of the things that's both exciting and also I can imagine raises questions is what happens when things are so easy to create now? And we have seen with teachers and with young people, experimentation is happening in different pockets. So one of the things that is that I find really, exciting is not the right word, but I find curious and I want to know more about, and this is my researcher hat on, is what are young people doing when they have the opportunity to produce? And so, we know for several years now on TikTok, on Instagram Reels, people have been using AI filters to really address the way they are being presented. So there's some research one of my colleagues, Ioanni Literat, has done looking at the way that adolescents and young adults have used filters to represent their future selves. So I want to imagine myself as a nurse. I want to imagine myself as a physician. I want to imagine myself as an archaeologist. And so those are really interesting ways that young people are using these tools to envision a future, to envision a personal future. I do think this conversation can't be lacking the kind of concerns that you can imagine the educators and artists are going to have. So we'll start with the educators. One question that we've heard educators talk about is what is actually happening when young people are using these tools to produce um, realities that are not real, right? And so, look, this has happened with crayon and paper. This has happened with, filmmaking, editing tools. I was talking with a teacher last summer who gave a really great example of how she uses, and she had been using Canva creation, image creation with her students. And she was working on social justice projects, and she wanted them to develop a social impact project that they would imagine wanting to be able to do. But then she also asked them to visualize what that would look like. And so here's where she found, and I think her experience with this was really powerful. The teens in her class were using Canva to generate prompts that would get close to what they were envisioning as a social impact through their work. And one of the things she found was they really had to work on what it meant to prompt these things to generate these images. Now they weren't using them for commercial use, they were using it for their own imagination. But the other thing that happened was as the image generator kept getting it wrong, it helped them refine their own imagination of what they wanted. So I think that's a really interesting use of it too. It's not just about generating what I want to see and what I want to be able to do. It's generating options and gap to say, what am I actually trying to get at? So in that way, thinking about using these tools as thought partners and not only as product generators, I think might be another way for us to be thinking about it. So I'll pause there because I think there's a lot to kind of think about when you think about what does it play at the intersection of art, education, and agency with these tools.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think that concept of sort of iterative conversational use is one of the
Mm,
things that makes AI so different from almost any other technology that's come
mm,
before, right? It doesn't just give you answers and you walk away. It's not web search, it's not a camera, right? You go back and forth, and the idea of using that to refine ideas is fascinating. So,
mm,
Amanda, this idea of seeing your future self is like what a beautiful use case. You have been all over the country. You're working with educators every day, and you've mentioned that, schools are basically thinking about AI, but they don't really have AI literacy training in place. They don't often have really good policies in place. They're wrestling with putting all the pieces together to create really exciting use cases like what we just heard Lalitha name. What do you see as the foundation of AI readiness for schools? What do they need to do to really be able to use it in innovative, transformational ways?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And first of all, Aletha, I already think about a young person that tried to create an unsexist CEO with Canva and then created the most sexist CEO. And what a learning opportunity that was. It's actually in our keynote now. So image generation is such an interesting way to teach young people about AI literacy. I think for us, it's interesting because I'm a former teacher, but also I've been in ed tech. And I don't think I was ever really thinking really strategically about digital literacy before I started working and building AI for education. And one of the things that's really clear is that what we've learned is that digital native does not equal digitally literate. That
Mhm.
just because we grow up with laptops and phones and social media does not mean that we know how to use those tools in ways that actually further our wants and goals or can use them in ways that are safe. And so one of the things I think is really interesting about this moment in time is that while the internet and technology was very different, generative AI is unlike any technology we've ever used, plus some. And I'm sure Ellen can talk about that too. And that these tools look like they have almost no barrier to entry. If you can type or text or talk, you can use generative AI. But what we people don't recognize is just that these are technical skills, that this is you're building with technology, you're just using natural language to do it. And
Mhm.
so it's kind of this weird thing that anyone can use AI, but to use it with actual knowledge and literacy is worlds apart in terms of like the actual impact, the idea that you also have that it's safe and ethical. Like our AI literacy framework is safe, ethical, and effective use. And so that's what we really think about. But I think for us, foundational AI literacy is intentional AI literacy. It is not bringing in a tool and like that means that students know how to use a chatbot, is not giving teachers access to any suite of like either foundation models or the applications. But it's like, what is this and what is it not? What is your level of control? How are these tools designed and developed? And then also that creativity that Lalitha was talking about of actually understanding that every time you use generative AI, you're generating something new, which is a fascinating opportunity, but also a huge risk. Because it will, if you want new AI literacy frameworks, you can go to ChatGPT and it will make it up. If it's not a good, like it's not necessarily going to give you these great evidence-based approaches. It might just be making up a fake human that was an AI literacy expert. So for us, I think that's a big cornerstone. And then the other is like, I don't think there's ever been a moment in time other than maybe COVID where like teachers and students and leaders alike want guardrails. They want to have some kind of bounded idea of like this is something we can try. These are the calculated risks we can take. These are the places that we should avoid so that I always think of like the shrug emoji where you're like people are kind of like this where the uncertainty and fear are so high and the noise around us is so big that to be able to get people to actually not be reactive but to proact and to be in the moment, if you create those spaces of knowledge with AI literacy but also the spaces in which we know what's appropriate, I think it just helps and like that's when the work happens because the work has to be education has to change. Like, and we've known that for like a while, but this is like our wrecking ball. It's taking things down. And so I think, but without those two things in place, it's almost impossible to do that work. And we see it over and over again, Alex, where you're like, but we have guidelines, we have no AI literacy. And they're like, and then we had this meeting and it was like not great, or we have AI literacy, but no one knows what to do next. And so nothing's happening. And so I think that those two things are what we really think about as that foundation.
Yeah, I like that wrecking ball metaphor. It's like on one hand, AI is this magic mirror, this creative magic wand. You can see yourself in the future and see what CEOs look like and imagine what kind of impact you want to have. And on the other, it's a wrecking ball. It can do anything. Nobody knows what it's going to do. There's a need for guardrails. So Ellen, I guess the question for you is given the creative potential Lalitha describes, and there's so many things that AI can do, and the challenges, the literacy challenges, the guardrail challenges Amanda raises. How do you think about implementing this brand new technology in classrooms? You've spent decades thinking about transformational technology adoption. What do you feel like are the biggest, opportunities and risks as we think about AI in the classroom right now? And how do we avoid a future where the risks sort of win out and people say, have that shrug emoji and just say, it sounds amazing, but I don't want to touch it.
Well, that is a very good question because I think that there are many barriers for teachers, given the excitement that Lalitha described and the excitement that Amanda talks about in terms of working with teachers. I think everybody wants to explore the tool, but when it comes to actually thinking about how it can be used effectively in the classroom, unless we spend more time with our teachers, and support them more deeply in terms of the integration and thinking about how they can apply and use it. I'm afraid that it is going to be something that's a new and interesting item, but nothing that they feel comfortable using without a lot more support. I've talked about digitizing the status quo, which is something that when you don't have time to work with people, teachers, to give them the vision for what could be and how this tool could be used and how important it is to help our students look at both the input and the output critically. Without that kind of support, it's going to be, I think, a retro fit with schools. So one of the things that we work on at the center, we work at lots of different schools across New York City and abroad. It's really important to help teachers think about what is the future of schooling? Where are we going? How would you like to work with your students? And how can some of these new technologies expand those possibilities?
Yeah, I think that brought. I love your point about being on the ground, really sort of understanding, having more professional development, more connection, more understanding of what teachers actually need in the classroom. If it sort of comes from on high, right? Either, it comes from either administration saying we need to use AI. Here's some AI, you should use it, or it comes from an external source like an AI company saying, hey, this is going to change everything. You should use it. If the teachers don't feel embedded and involved, it can just sort of go right by. It can be treated like a fad or something confusing or scary. Lalitha, just building on this concept of digital literacy and the fact that they can create new worlds that have never existed. You said, hey, we could do that with a crayon, we could do it with a camcorder, but now you can do it at a level we've never seen before. You can create things totally realistic. In that world, how do students understand that world where you have to look at everything with skepticism, or do you feel like students are particularly vulnerable to this world where any photo or video may be real or may not be real? And then, of course, based on the topic of the webinar, how should educators think about this world where suddenly we're in a world where digital literacy means something just very, very different? You have to be to really understand what AI generated content looks like, think about detection, think about verification, help students navigate this really, really strange world. How do students and how do educators navigate this new, very strange, environment we're entering where anything could be real or could be AI?
Yeah, and I know we've spoken about this before, Alex, this sense of adolescence as a really important and complex time of young people's lives and of people's lives. And there's so much already happening when you're an adolescent. You're navigating the kind of bridge between childhood and adulthood, but you're also suddenly newly aware of so many different political realities of different social worlds, different connections in the world. And so now entering into that in a very substantive way is a glut of visual, largely information that we are having to process it every second. And so, one of the things I know we've talked about is sort of like young people, adolescents, even some of our early younger graduate students coming in with a kind of sense of, yeah, I don't believe anything. But then I go through my own sense of verification. So I think one of the trends that I think we're seeing is a kind of reification of the hyperlocal and really thinking about what do I actually know and trust? And that circle is fairly small. And then recognizing that since anyone can be shown to say anything, where does that leave me as an adolescent? Where does that leave me as an educator? And one of the things that I think, we do some work with fifth graders in the last few years. We've been doing some work with educators of fifth graders and middle and high school. And this kind of tension between how people come to trust one another is really being impacted by the fact that they're also receiving messages about this hypervigilance we all have to have as citizens to navigate everything. And so, there was another story that of the top 100 YA books on Amazon's most popular downloaded young adult novels, something like over 80 of them were, or 70 of them were AI generated. So this raises really interesting questions for what is it that young people are consuming? We are living in a political landscape, I mean, little p political, not big P political, where different perspectives can be communicated through different forms. And the strength of the visual is deeply compelling. We're seeing this everything from, we used to worry I think, ChatGPT launch of deep fakes, right? Like I remember back like in 2016 or 2015, there was some deep fake of President Obama that had been released. And look at this technology, it's amazing. And now this is commonplace. And
Oh yeah.
so what do we do about that? And I want to echo something that Ellen said about not only the need to bring educators further into this conversation, but can we find ways for educators and young people to revisit what that teaching and learning relationship is? And this goes to Amanda's point about we need to rethink education. We've needed to rethink education. And as a colleague here has said, generative AI explosion is really putting a light on questions that have been fundamental to people who are thinking critically about education. What are we doing when we are developing schools, teaching in schools, supporting young people to be in conversation with one another and with education? And so, what I'd like to really have educators be engaged in and invited to think about is how are you thinking about where adolescents are as they're navigating these landscapes, and how are you being invited to really get a sense of what is this landscape, And I think one of the challenges here is because there's so much, and I think this goes back to something Amanda said, like there's so much, the landscape is so vast, it can feel overwhelming. Where do I start? And so that part, I think we need to figure out, not only developers, and I think I saw a question in the chat that was saying like, hey, I'd love to partner with really thoughtful educators, but how do we actually make that happen in a sustainable, thoughtful way? And how can we think about the fact, the reality is there are different bottom lines. Education has a different bottom line than developers and the tech industry. That's okay, but we need to acknowledge it and think about how we address that.
Yeah, so many so many powerful points in there. I think this idea of the trust, I sort of think of it as like a crisis of trust, right? And that young people maybe are way ahead in that crisis of trust. They've already learned to distrust many things that come across their vision in any given day. And I love that phrase, reification of the hyper local, right? I trust what's in my world. I trust what I can see right here from people I know personally, but I'm not sure what to trust on social media. I'm not sure what to trust on YouTube. And then, it strikes me when you talk about the relationship, the relationship, educators and young people, educators and and students are navigating this new terrain together right now. And I think we should all maybe acknowledge that more than we do. There's no reason to expect that an educator would know more about Sora 2, which came out 2 weeks, a week ago and now has 1 million downloads and can create those Obama deepfakes at scale, then that why would an educator know more than a student? A student is probably going to know more, but nobody really knows much of anything. So if we're all entering this new world together, how do we sort of maybe flatten the dynamic a little bit and everybody learns together? I can imagine a class activity. It's like identify which of these three things is real, and the whole class, including the teacher, is working together on that. So Amanda, let me pass this to you. You've talked about how digitally literate and digital native are not the same, right? So it's maybe to you, do you agree that young people come with this sense of distrust or with this sense of sort of hypervigilance, trying to understand what's real and they've figured it out? Or do you feel like they're actually have no idea what's going on because they're young, very young, and they haven't been exposed to many things in the world? How do you see that relationship between young people who maybe jaded or maybe naive, and how that plays out in the classroom?
Well, I think the first thing is that expectations about, I think that we have like, I don't know what the right word for this, so maybe Ellen or Lalitha know this, but things that were true like 3, 4 years ago that we believe are true forever is just not the case. And I don't think it's really a misconception, but it's something like with generative AI is really pressing on this really interesting thing where like, climate impact was very different 2.5 years ago versus today, but we think of it as 2.5 years ago because things are moving so quickly. So, but deep fakes, for example, there's this idea that I'd be able to spot a deep fake, but they are becoming so much less like if you have any just care and you're spending time using these, like voice AI deepfakes are getting to the point where they are absolutely like you cannot tell the difference. We do that as one of our demos to get people to pay attention to like what's happened. But I think that what we have to shift our thinking for everyone is that when we see something, we can no longer think it's real. We need to think if it's we have to think it's not real and then be convinced that it's real. And I
Hmm.
think that while right now we're in this like weird like liminal space where that's kind of true and not true at the same time, right? But in the next 2 to 3 years, our like understanding of what is real is going to change really significantly because of how good these tools are and how much effort. I mean, the thing about Sora 2 is that OpenAI is saying we had no idea that people would create deep fakes of real people doing horrible things. It's such a crazy thing for anyone to ever say, considering what happened with GPT-4o image generator. But
And just human nature, it's like the first thing people are
but
gonna
it's
do.
yeah, but it's the
Yeah.
viral nature of it that means they're still willing to put it into the world for 671,000 downloads on iOS because it's viral and they want a $500 billion valuation. So there's this really like fascinating push and pull. For us, I think the issue is two things. One is the developmentally appropriateness of talking about AI. If you're like an 18-year-old and your mom is showing you an image, you're gonna be like, Mom, this is AI. Come on. The Pope is not wearing a puffy coat, which is one of the famous ones from a couple of years ago. But if you're like an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, or a 12-year-old that does not have the emotional reserves, the critical thinking, even enough images in their life to have seen to have a schema of what's real or not, that has to be a different conversation. And I think that AI literacy for like young people should start very early about learning about the tools and knowing when they will see this in the wild, so to speak. Because we're only about another year, 2 years before Alexa will start to not just tell you a joke that's pre-programmed, but it will do an entire bedtime story that could or could not be appropriate. Is that what we have is like the need to like really do some foundational work around like those that are very young, very early, and then those of us that are have more developmental understanding, critical evaluation skills, foundational skills, and knowledge of technology need to start understanding what this means in context. Like, what does this mean? I will just use an example. Like, this is the thing that's so wild is like Deloitte in Australia had to pay the government back 440 million Australian dollars because they used AI and it created fake citations, fake research. And if like Deloitte are getting their like are like not able to keep the constant awareness of critical evaluation and distrust and like healthy distrust of these tools, then how is a 14, 15-year-old or a teacher that's running from classroom to classroom or a leader or a parent able to do that? And so I think that this is where that like and I feel like honestly Ellen, Lalitha, and Alex, I just need to have a shirt that says AI literacy because it's all I talk about. But we have seen how that can help create informed decision making that like when I get Sora 2, am I immediately going to create a really terrible deep fake or am I going to do something like fun and silly that clearly is something that's not going to hurt others is one of those ways in which behavior can quickly be changed.
Yeah, it's a really good, it's a really interesting set of insights there. I mean, one thing that strikes me as we talk about all of this is that, when AI changes this fast, when things grow this quickly in popularity, when kids and teachers are exposed to this huge suite of different AI tools, there's sort of a risk that the technology itself becomes the center of conversation. I mean, it's so new, it's so exciting, it can do so many things. Even the concept of AI literacy, if you start injecting AI literacy into the classroom, everybody's talking about AI, about how to figure it out, what's real or authentic or not. Um, do we lose, school is still about learning and how we learn both new things like technology and how we learn the core curriculum that we're all still trying to teach in the classroom still has to take center stage. And I know, Ellen, you think about this a lot, right? When you see schools rushing to adopt AI tools, what should they be doing to figure out which tools are actually going to be relevant to the learning process, and how do we sort of balance the idea of teaching curriculum versus teaching AI, and how do we help educators shift from sort of what frustrates me, how do I just do something better, to what could transform my classroom? What could take us to a new level instead of just always trying to keep up with things that are happening around us? I know I asked you three questions at once, but hopefully they make sense together.
And they're all very difficult questions.
That too.
They're not easy to answer. I think it's a matter of listening to our teachers more. Our teachers are professionals. Our teachers know their students. They know the parents. The teachers and the administrators working together have to be trusted to help us as those folks who are interested in technology and the potential and power and creativity and excitement and et cetera of technology, how to use it for good, how to use it to spark students in ways that they've never been excited about learning before. We had a teacher who asked students to look up how many authors had come from Bed-Stuy. And so the list came out, but how much of it, as both Lalitha and Amanda have been talking about, how much of it was real? So they had to become folks who investigated that, and that's a new series of skills for students, of course, but an essential set of skills for today. And I think that teachers know that, and they don't want to ignore these tools. Not that they're always used as tools, but these resources, I'd rather say. But how to do that effectively without much more professional development, more time given to it. We can't ask our schools, our teachers, our administrators to move into the whatever century we're in without giving them the kind of support and respect and acknowledgement that they need to have in order to help use all of these resources, wonderful resources, effectively.
So quick follow-up question for you there, because this is something I'm really wrestling with. We are these AI world that we're sort of entering very quickly, being thrust into as a society, is new for everybody. It really is. Nobody is an expert at these tools that have come out weeks or months ago. People say they are, but nobody's a true expert. It's brand new for the entire world. So if we take, I think your advice and your idea to trust educators, to look to them to be leaders, to make sense of their context, to really be the sort of authorities in what's making sense. You didn't use those words, but makes a lot of sense. But also, in a world where everybody is sort of a beginner, how can educators navigate that funny, that line between they are beginners themselves. They don't know how to do digital authenticity. They probably don't have AI literacy the way they want to have it yet. But we also have to look to them to be the experts and teach it to others and advocate for policies and in their classroom. How can they navigate those two roles?
Another very difficult question.
It is.
But I think it's not a monolithic. The teaching profession, just like change anywhere, is going to break itself into the teachers who are the early adopters and folks at tail end saying, I'd rather just wait and see what happens. So I think if we can help our teachers, give them time, give them the support, give them the professional development, professional learning opportunities, they'll find ways to maybe put a committee together, maybe bring some parents in. It's a matter of thinking about organizational change. And for me, it's that whole very challenging idea of retrofitting what has been pretty much the same for many decades, many decades, and introducing new tools that can help us think much more deeply about how to engage our students as teachers who have access to these amazing new resources.
Yeah, I think that Bed-Stuy example is really interesting for anybody who doesn't know New York. Bed-Stuy is a historically Black neighborhood in Brooklyn. It's been gentrifying for a long time, but a really, really famous historical neighborhood. And the idea of being able to dive deep into the authors from that neighborhood, that's such a great way to combine AI and research with an ELA curriculum, something you're actually doing in a classroom anyway, as well as a sort of motivational aspect as well. We help students see themselves, their identity as a potentially as a writer. I love that example. Let's talk a little bit about assessment. Assessment is such a huge part of education. It's such a complex part of education, and I think it's an area that it truly could be transformed in this AI era that we're entering. Amanda, let me start with you this time. You have lots of strong feelings about assessment as schools grapple with AI, right? Teachers are wrestling with fundamental questions about assessment. They're saying, what should learning and evaluation look like when students can generate really sophisticated work pretty much instantly through their typing or text or voice? Can you share a little bit of how you think about this? You have an AI integrated learning scale. You are thinking about assessment a lot. Tell us about how assessment may have to change in this moment and how schools are thinking about it.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's almost like this kind of rhetoric that Gen AI like began cheating. That like Gen AI is like the tool that made cheating for like it's like the democratization of cheating. And what I think is really interesting is that it actually really comes down to the systems that have been in place that have led to this moment in time, meaning that like the first company, like we talk about EdTech, the first what is it? You'll know, what is the first company that lost almost all of its worth in EdTech after ChatGPT was released in March?
Chegg.
It was Chegg.
Yeah.
Chegg is, was, considered to be the kind of premier 99.99. I can go and get all my answers answered, and it became very popular during COVID. And it's the first company of any type, really, and that was public that lost a lot of its value immediately because people saw that now students were going to immediately shift to another way of cheating. And there's plenty of research that shows that search volumes around things like essay mills versus how do I use ChatGPT, things like Grammarly having both an AI detector as well as I'll do your work for you. Like if you go help me write my essay, Grammarly has actually put search terms, like they will have a nice little ad about that. In the top 50 consumer apps by age 16Z, one is Quillbot, which is a paraphrasing tool used for cheating, and one is Zero GPT, which is an AI detector used by teachers. So what's really fascinating, and all the way, but Alex, like this is what I think about a lot because the rhetoric in schools and around schools is so negative that AI is for cheating that it is almost impossible to have some real conversations with teachers and or leaders or students themselves. Students are internalizing that all AI use is bad AI use because of that, just as much as students are hiding their use. And so one of the things that I think is really interesting is that the research on assessment, high stakes assessments, have shown that this is not a meaningful way to assess young people around future readiness. Asking everyone to come on a Tuesday and drop all your knowledge at one time and then move on is not how work works, right? I don't know, Alex, if you ask Sarah to show up one day and she just has to know about everything about this webinar and then forget it forever. But that's like really interesting because we already knew that, right? We knew it didn't work for those with knowledge gaps or learning disabilities or multilingual students or those that had high stakes testing that leads to pressure, all of these things, right? So when you use the wrecking ball metaphor, which I'm kind of upset with because all I can think of is Miley Cyrus, and I like hate that I can't use my metaphor. But what we have is that the wrecking ball of generative AI is not creating new cracks. It is exposing the cracks that are already there and pushing down those walls, meaning that like assessment was already broken for many. And now what we have though is that there's the easy button for every traditional assessment. And so what's happening is this like incredibly disruptive force around like assessment itself. And the thing is that whether you're a college professor or a high school teacher that has been using maybe a bulldozer, I'll take a bulldozer. Okay, because I can't be Miley Cyrus. I can't make an image about this because everyone's going to think that only. So I'm going to take bulldozer from now on. But this idea, though, that we have, no traditional assessment in any port of call is safe anymore. It's just not. There's just not one that lives out into the world that is going to be safe from AI use, especially thoughtful AI use. So I think what we have to do is we have to look at the purpose of assessment and we have to look at the purpose of learning. Like that, we have to like start to go to those really deep understandings of the why. and the why of learning and assessment. So one of the things that we were talking about, everyone, you guys missed a great conversation beforehand. We should have done a back behind the scenes little piece. But the idea is that in a world in which AI can do what was uniquely human around almost all of our kind of knowledge work, even now more creativity, what does it mean to choose not to use AI? Whether that is to teach, to learn, to express ourselves, and like how does that shift our thinking about learning and assessment? Where we really lean into the human skills, the things that matter the most, the things we care about the most, the things that we know allow people to not only succeed, but to grow. And I think, and to have success and to be successful across generations. It is not for the faint of heart. I will be honest, everybody, we do not go into a partner and be like, everything needs to change. But what happens is that when you start building all of those foundational knowledges, everyone, like the brains go there because you start to realize that what we have done for decades to since the Industrial Revolution no longer works, and it will work less and less in the next 3, 5, 10 years. And so for us, like one of the things that like our hidden mission is not just AI literacy for 1 million education students, but like how do schools meet this moment and actually improve and create spaces in which kids really can learn for the future that's already here when we're teaching them the future that was 20 years ago. Okay, off soapbox, done. New
That's powerful.
metaphor, new
I
metaphor acquired. Everything is great.
the bulldozer, the bulldozer and the wrecking ball that exposes the cracks in the existing system and tears down the edifice. I think there's a lot to be said there. Lalitha, you've mentioned a couple of different assessments in this conversation, or types of assessment that I think are interesting here in relationship to what Amanda is saying about, how might assessment change? What might it evolve to if
Mm.
we get rid of the, come on one day, you have to drop all your knowledge. I thought that was a really funny way to put that, Amanda. That idea of expressing your future self, that idea of being able to, figure out, verify material, having an iterative conversation with AI to get to a really meaningful product. One of the really interesting things about AI right now is that rather than having to sort of build your skills up from the very bottom, right? You learn to draw the circle, then you learn to do the shading, then you learn to do the this, and then finally you have a picture you're proud of. You can make the picture right on day one and then work backwards and say, okay, what did it just do there? It has shading there. I have to learn how to do shading. Oh, it did this. This is an interesting sort of reversal where you can get to an end product and then sort of work backwards to figure out all the pieces that you need to bring to it, especially the things you need to bring as a human and not as an AI. So I'm introducing a lot of ideas here, but how do you think that we should redesign curriculum to make assessment more meaningful, more motivational, and get away from that, sit down and do the long exam and dump everything out of our brain, to a much more iterative, natural form of assessment where you can actually, build the skills in a really organic, almost maybe a fun way.
Yeah, I really want to echo something Amanda said, just,
Please.
kind of doubling down on the human, that learning broadly and education in particular are a profoundly human endeavor. And so when we are building schools, when we are developing degree programs, when we are thinking about curriculum, we want to maintain the human in it. And so we are at an age now where there's increasingly artificial elements to how people are knowledge creating and knowledge access. But I really do want to second also this idea that the last several years of AI revolution is doing is that kind of exposure, right? Like these are things, and this is what I was mentioning before, that like these are questions that educators, teacher educators, researchers have been asking for a very long time. And so what you're now kind of having to grapple with is, great, I might have all of these resources, tools, platforms, computing capacity that is growing exponentially minute by minute. Um, it still is going to exist at the same time. There are schools without working bathrooms. So I understand that we're talking at completely different kind of domains here, but that is the reality of kids who are physically going to school. And I do still think bricks and mortars matters. And, and so it is this question of how do we not only kind of rethink what the nature of education is and how we are thinking about teaching and learning, but what are the commitments we are making as a society to education? How are we funding it? How are we thinking about the importance of maintaining that kind of human proximity so that we can do things like building trust? We can re reaffirm the human, even as the capacity for machines to do so much is only getting larger and larger.
Mm.
We're inundated in the headlines with, our big tech leaders saying we want to do even more, even more, even more. And I understand that's their remit, that's their charge, that's what they want to do. But someone, and I think it's the educators, it's the ordinary citizenry, has to keep asking to what end and how is it then going to shape what we do educationally. One of the tensions that's always been there, and this is largely how many assessments have been developed, is that schooling is seen schooling seen as a way to prepare the workforce. And certainly that's an important piece of this, right? We want young people, children to gain the kind of skills and experiences and knowledge to be able to contribute productively. We also want to not make that the only focus of education because we know that experimentation and imagination and the unpredictable is what also brings value to society. And so when you have increasing kind of reliance on without the AI literacy, without the kind of foundational knowledge, what what I worry about is a kind of seeding of that criticality to the machines, whereas that's the human piece. And so I would like to know, how do we think about, earlier in the conversation, Alex, you suggested thinking about sort of these tools and these technologies as thought partners, as like iteration partners.
Yeah.
And where do we need to get people to in order to be able to do that? And how can we resist the kind of pull of, okay, now you're a user now. And so now you're going to use all 100 of our tools versus we are here to support the kind of development of creativity and imagination. The last thing I just wanted to say, because I think it bears just repeating, is that we do have, like I said, fundamentally different bottom lines, and different ones are going to win out at different times in the polling, at voting booths, at our local elections, at the choices we make about what to download and what to not. And I know there's a fear that computer scientists aren't needed anymore, right? Like this is the other thing. I I would love for us to imagine a world where we actually need thoughtful, critical, social science, humanities grounded computer scientists even more. Like if you're expanding computing power to what we can't even imagine, how about the folks who are doing that being also grounded in the kind of societal questions that we want to be able to answer? So I think it's that, like that's that big 35,000-foot view that actually gets played out in middle school classrooms and high school classrooms, because that's fundamentally what's at issue when we're thinking about what are we building curriculum for? What are we building pedagogy around?
Yeah, your focus on sort of the human, the role of humans, but yeah, it's not how you put it. But what are the human skills? What are the human motivations? What are the pieces that should and must, be coming from humans? Be local, be in person, be interrelational. Feels like a real key to unlock a lot of the pieces of this to me because it relates to the workforce, right? I mean, as the workforce changes, as entry level jobs change, they will change in a way where there will be some set of human skills, orchestration, verification. I don't know what they're going to be, but there'll be some set of human skills that cannot be ceded to AI. And that's what the future of the workforce is going to become. So if we can start identifying those in the context of education and in of assessment, and then potentially that could become a through line of where all of education moves. And I think, I love your metaphor of, not turning, you didn't say it quite this way, but, people into users, that in that iterative back and forth in people using AI tools, we don't want to teach a whole generation of students just to become, users of tools. We want to teach them to become people who can decide where to go, what to make, what change they want to have in the world, self-actualize. And all of these tools just become their, help them get there in whatever way that they can make that happen. They're not subservient to the tools. They're the masters. They're the heads of whatever they want to do in the world, and the tools are just a support structure. And that's just a really interesting sort of dynamic to navigate in education. You know, everybody, please put questions in the Q&A. This is my last formal question for this group. We will have 10 questions of 10 minutes of Q&A right after this. So please drop questions in. This is my last formal question, but it's for you, Ellen. You have talked about assessment being really key to change in the future. And you've talked about how we risk, digitizing the status quo, making all of these new tools and then using them to just reify and fix the things that are already in place if we're not careful. Can you paint us a little bit of a picture about what thoughtful systemic change might actually look like? How might we move beyond that quick professional development that we often see and get more embedded, really invest in our teachers, really treat them as professionals, really think about what AI transformation looks like if you bring the whole community together around it? What would that look like? What's if you could wave a wand and have that work, what should we see in a few years if we get that right?
Well, I want that wand for one thing. I think if I'm maybe four of them we need. I think the assessment issue is really critical because of the high stakes. Testing per se, I don't think, we've grew up being tested, and we teachers need to understand where their students are, but it's the high stakes aspect of testing that I think puts so much pressure on teachers to simply, if you think about it, it's very efficient to tell students what they have to know in order to put those answers on a test. That's just sort of, but what we need to do, of course, is very different than that. And so in order to think about assessment differently, as Mandab, you were saying, and Lalitha, you were saying in a different way, we really need to rethink education altogether, or maybe not altogether, but the critical pieces of what it is we want our students to know, to be able to go out into the world and be that a strong citizen that we need them to be for a democracy. Because of that, what we have focused on is project-based learning as a way to help teachers think about how it is that we build that knowledge and how it is that we can assess in a very different way through performance, through different ways of understanding what our students understand. But the focus is on understanding and not facts per se, as I think you alluded to, Alex. And so if we can provide more of that support for our teachers and get to the point where we're doing very interesting things with the kids. But again, it goes back to teachers, the professionalization of the teaching profession and the support that they need to be able to sustain and grow in this. New York State is redefining what it is to graduate from high school in some very loose, I'm generalizing, but they're rethinking that. And I think there's some potential around the country to do some thinking about what else we could, besides some of those high stakes measures, what we can be doing for our students to equip them and to know that we've really provided them with the kind of humanness and ability to become even more human, if you will, over time with the use of these resources. I think that's where we could and should be going.
Yeah. So we have a couple of some really interesting questions coming in from our audience. There's a couple of questions about the Alpha School movement, right? For those who might not know, Alpha Schools are a set of private schools. There's one opening in New York right now that basically try to take the actual sort of content delivery and do it in 2 hours using AI tools, and then use the rest of the day for collaborative learning and various things. It has a pretty hefty price tag, but it's sort of positioning itself as a model of what the future of AI education would look like. Primer, Alpha Schools, places like that. We have two different people asking about that. does anybody want to jump in and say, how they react to that school model?
Sure. I guess I'll I'll be the tribute. I would say that I think that it's interesting that this is the only school model that I've seen really capture the imagination with AI. So I think that that's really interesting, this idea of like the 2 hours of like AI driven like sit and get, and then you go and you get to do the more collaborative places. I would say that from every piece of research, every tool that we have, there is not a replacement to a high dosage tutor or a teacher that AI can replicate at this stage. I just feel very strongly to say that, whether that's Conmigo and Khan Academy walking back this idea of like that Conmigo was going to nail that it's much harder than it is. That we've seen that happen with, if you want to check out the Mashable review of all the 3 learning modes on ChatGPT, Claude, and Google. We've seen that as well. I think that what I would say is that the model is really interesting, but I question how good the AI component of this is. And we've seen other models like School of One in New York City. I was a New York City teacher, by the way, so like I got to see School of One when it first came out. But I do think that it is overblown in the sense of that AI can replace the teaching. And I think that that is I have not been convinced, and nor have I seen where outside of very, very self-directed learners that can work in a dialogic manner, meaning that they are able to sit down and be asked question after question after question after question, that there has been real like gains of AI, specifically generative AI teaching. So I just think that we have to be like aware of the limitations of the tools themselves, and not necessarily that the model, but could the model be something that is too early, but is paving the way that in 2 to 3 to 5 years, where this technology builds up, where that can start to change, where the classroom really can be a place of collaboration, durable skills. But just think right now, there's no technology that can replace a teacher's teaching. I just believe and I don't even say that because of like respect for teachers. It's from deep practice and seeing it and knowing the tools that I say that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Great, great answer. And yeah, it's a tricky moment for that. They're moving fast and they're getting a lot of attention for being this very particular model. But we'll see how it works out. Um, we have a question about what are a few actions a teacher can take to build support within his or her school to encourage risk taking with AI in the classroom. And by risk taking, I'm sure that's just trying things, helping create an environment that is comfortable trying some new things and not being too worried about not being overly worried about the effects, creating an opportunity to experiment. Ellen or Lalitha, I'd love to hear how you would do that if you were a teacher in the classroom right now. How do you build that culture of experimentation locally?
Lalitha, I'll go first. One of the things that we've found is that that's really a cultural issue for the school. And so the administration is very important. The role they play to encourage trying new things, learning from those new things, reflecting together on those new things, learning communities, creating learning communities in schools has been a very powerful way to support teachers who want to become even better teachers, or to start to integrate some of the things that they're seeing around and about that they want to use in their classroom. So I think it is a school by school event, but I think it also needs to be supported by the district, because then you need to reward the principals who have done such a great job of supporting the teachers who are doing such a great job of using these tools for the benefit of the students.
Yeah, no, Ellen said it better than I could, so we can move on to the next question.
Well, so we have a couple minutes left. Let's do a little lightning round here. I think this is a provocative and great, exciting question. What is the most interesting application of generative AI you've seen in a classroom? We've heard a few interesting ones already in this in this webinar, but I'd love to, dig in for, what is something where you're like, this feels new to me. This feels directionally like something that could open doors. Amanda, can I kick it to you to start it off? I know you spend a huge amount of time
I
in.
feel like I like get the hard ones. I hate to say it, and this is where like I think I've been very measured today because I think that I have a lot of questions about Gen AI ed tech. I have not seen one that I have been like absolutely floored that this is going to change what everything is. I think what we're too new. It's too new. It's like we're thinking about the problems of today. So for like, I'll just give an example. If we really want to change assessment, then the data we collect has to change.
Mm,
And with AI, it allows you to collect all types of data, which questions of privacy and whatever. But I think that like it just is like clear to me that like it's just too early for that real imagination to take hold, but also the understandings of the capabilities, I think are still being worked out by technologists. So
mm.
I would say and I don't mean to be negative, doesn't mean that there are great point solutions and things happening, but nothing that has like sparked my imagination where I'm like, I'm gonna get on my soapbox and scream to the outside, to everybody.
That's interesting. Others, how about you, Lalitha? What is an interesting application that you think is worth flagging to this audience?
Yeah, it's interesting because interesting is an interesting word.
Right.
I've seen a lot of um, questions that have come to mind when I've seen people tinker with different tools. So, it's been interesting to watch people use chatbots for very unexpected purposes. Um, it's
Mm.
been interesting to watch and tinker myself with Notebook LM, like as a thought partner for kind of organizing things. But this sort of revolutionary kind of quality, I agree with Amanda. Like I think I'm kind of glad we're early because it hopefully we can have additional voices helping to shape the questions that people should be asking about how can we harness this technology in order to do something, truly mind-boggling. I saw someone post a question that said, "Why haven't we cured cancer yet?" I thought this is what machine learning and AI technologies was supposed to do. And so, okay, so let's think about what we can harness this technology to do. So
Yes.
that to me is the interesting part, like the questions it's raising about what might be possible when harnessed thoughtfully, ethically, and responsibly.
That's the thing that gets me most excited is taking a classroom and saying, let's think of a real world problem we want to solve and let's try to solve it as a class using this incredible set of powers we've just been, you know, just been exposed to. Cancer would be a great example of that, but maybe it's a local issue. I find that's just such an interesting challenge and just such a way to bring authenticity, project-based learning into the classroom. But I can't say that it's happening certainly in a whole lot of places. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much to our panelists. We have Lalitha, Lalitha Vasudevan. We have Ellen Meier, Dr. Ellen Meier, Dr. Lalitha Vasudevan, and Amanda Bickerstaff, founder and CEO of AI for Education. Thank you all so much for being with us. We will see you all at EdTech Week. We hope that you are all there. And please, if you don't already subscribe or listen to EdTech Insiders, please consider checking it out. We have so many interesting conversations there. We just published our 400th podcast. We're really proud of all the work we've done there. Thank you to all of our panelists, and we really appreciate the audience being here today for a really fascinating conversation. The reification of the hyperlocal. That one's gonna stick with me. I really like that. I think there's something so interesting about that, among many other things said today. Thanks so much, all of you, for being here with us. Have a great weekend and a great rest of your day. We will see you at EdTech Week. Thanks all.